My daughter-in-law fell to her knees before me, her face a mask of sleepless terror, and begged me to make the nightmares stop. The ones where she watched me die, over and over again. I simply smiled and asked her, "But my dear, wasn't that your wish?" Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Eleanor. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 79 years old, and I live in a quiet little town nestled in the Green Mountains of Vermont. The story I'm about to tell you, it's a strange one. It's not a story of loud arguments or slammed doors. It's a story about a quiet, cruel wish, and an even quieter, stranger revenge. It's a secret that has lived in the walls of my house, in the leaves of my garden, for the past year. Even my own son, my dear, gentle son, only knows the ending. He knows his wife, Chloe, left him because she was tormented, because she believed our home was haunted. He doesn't know that the ghost was me. It's a terrible thing to admit you are capable of such a thing. For so long after it happened, I was suffocated by a shame that felt as heavy as a burial shroud. When your own child's wife, a woman you tried to love, looks at you with such coldness and wishes you gone from this earth, you begin to think you are the problem. You absorb their hatred, and it turns into a poison inside you. You start to believe you are the burden they say you are. But I am too old to carry another person's poison. I am telling my story now to finally let it go, to let the truth see the light. And perhaps it can serve as a warning that wishes are powerful things, and that you should be very, very careful what you wish for, especially when you wish it upon a quiet old woman who has nothing left to lose, and a deep knowledge of old-fashioned gardens. Before I begin to walk you down this dark path, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a comfort. It's a quiet strength that gives me the courage to confess my own strange and terrible secret. Thank you, my dears. Your kindness truly touches my heart. My story, the happy part of it, was rooted in this very soil. My husband, Arthur, was a history professor at the local college. He was a quiet, brilliant, gentle man. His passion was history, but his sanctuary was our garden. It wasn't a neat and tidy garden. It was a wild and wonderful English-style garden, filled with a chaotic mix of roses and herbs, and strange forgotten plants had order from obscure catalogs. He would spend hours out there, his hands in the dirt. He always said a garden teaches you patience, and that some plants, like people, have secrets you can only learn by watching them closely. Our life was simple, but it was rich. It was a life of books and long walks, and the smell of damp earth after a rainstorm. We had one son, Leo. My Leo? He inherited his father's kind heart, but none of his quiet strength. Leo is a man who feels the wind and immediately bends to it, desperate to avoid being broken. He is a good man, a loving man, but his goodness is a soft, pliable thing. He's a people pleaser, which is a lovely trait until it requires him to stand up for someone. And then, 5 years ago, Leo brought home Chloe. Oh, she was like a bolt of lightning in our quiet, comfortable world. She was an architect from the city. She was beautiful, ambitious, and radiated a kind of high-strung, modern energy that was both dazzling and exhausting. She was everything my quiet, academic son was not, and he was utterly captivated by her. He looked at her as if she were the sun. On the surface, she was a marvel of politeness. She called me Eleanor. She complimented my tea. She admired the house. But there was a subtle condescension in her admiration. She was like an anthropologist studying a quaint, forgotten tribe. I remember the first time she walked through our garden with me. Arthur had passed a few years earlier, and I did my best to keep it up. She looked at his wild, beautiful chaos of herbs and flowers, and she smiled a thin, tight smile. "It's very rustic, Eleanor," she said. "A bit of a blank slate. You could do wonders with this space. Some clean lines, some minimalist planters, maybe a water feature. We could really modernize it." She didn't see a garden that had been lovingly cultivated for 50 years. She saw a problem to be fixed, an outdated space to be gutted and replaced. And I felt a cold little shiver run down my spine, because I had the distinct feeling that she looked at me in much the same way. Leo, of course, was blind to it all. He was so in love, so eager to please her. When she'd make a cutting remark disguised as a helpful suggestion, he would just laugh and say, "That's my Chloe, always improving things." He didn't see that she wasn't trying to improve things. She was trying to erase them. She was trying to erase his past. After they were married, the erasure began in earnest. They moved into a large, modern house that Chloe had designed herself. A place of glass and steel and white walls that felt more like a gallery than a home. When I would visit, I felt like a dusty antique that had been accidentally left behind by the previous owners. A year ago, I had a small fall. I broke my wrist. It wasn't serious, but it was enough. It was the excuse Chloe had been waiting for. "Eleanor, you simply cannot live alone anymore," she announced, her voice filled with a perfect imitation of loving concern. "It's out of the question. You must come and live with us. We'll take care of you." Leo, my dear boy, was so relieved. "It's the perfect solution, Mom. We'll all be together." I was hesitant. My quiet life, my garden, my memories, they were my world. But I was 78, I had a broken wrist, and my son was looking at me with such pleading in his eyes. So I packed up a few of my most precious things. I found a neighbor to tend to my garden, and I moved into their cold, white house. I thought I was moving in with family. I didn't realize I was moving into a battleground, and that I was already considered a casualty of a war I didn't even know had begun. Moving into their house was like being neatly placed inside a beautiful, sterile, white box. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to settle. Every surface was hard and gleaming. My own small collection of treasures, my books, a few framed photos of Arthur, my favorite worn armchair, were relegated to the guest room I was assigned. Chloe called it my suite, but it felt like a polite form of quarantine. She made it clear, in 1,000 small, unspoken ways, that my life, my history, was a form of clutter that was not to contaminate her perfect, minimalist aesthetic. The first few weeks I tried to make myself useful, to find a rhythm, but my every attempt was gently, expertly rebuffed. I'd offer to cook dinner, and Chloe would smile sweetly and say, "Oh, Eleanor, that's not necessary. We have a meal delivery service. It's all organic, gluten-free, and portion-controlled. It's just easier." I'd try to tidy the living room, and she would glide in behind me, replumping a cushion I had just plumped, or adjusting a book on the coffee table by a millimeter. It was never a criticism, not in words. It was a constant, silent correction. A reminder that this was her space, her rules, and my very presence was a disruption to its perfect order. I was not a mother-in-law. I was a problem to be managed. A living, breathing piece of outdated furniture she had been forced to accommodate. And my son, my Leo, he saw it all. I would see the flicker of pain in his eyes when Chloe would make a particularly cutting remark. But he would never speak up. He was a man caught in a spider's web, and he was so terrified of the spider, he would not even dare to twitch. His silence was his complicity. It was 1,000 tiny betrayals, every single day. The real conflict, the true focus of Chloe's cold disdain, became my garden. Or rather, my knowledge of it. After my wrist healed, I began spending time in their backyard. It was a sad, sterile space, a perfect green lawn, a few identical shrubs, and a concrete patio. It had no soul. I tried to bring it to life. I asked if I could plant a small herb garden in a corner. "An herb garden," Chloe said, her perfectly sculpted eyebrow raising a fraction of an inch. "Oh, I don't know, Eleanor. It could look so messy. And what would we even do with all those herbs?" But Leo, in a rare moment of assertiveness, thought it was a wonderful idea. "So," Chloe relented, with the air of an adult granting a foolish wish to a child, "I was given a small, designated patch of earth. It was my only refuge. I would spend hours out there, my hands in the dirt, talking to my plants, just as Arthur used to. I brought over a few special ones from my old garden at home. Some chamomile, some valerian for tea, and some of my more. The ones Arthur and I had studied in his old botany books. Plants with secrets. Chloe hated my garden. She saw it as a patch of messy, untamed wilderness, encroaching on her perfect lawn. She would watch me from the kitchen window, her arms crossed, her face a mask of disapproval. The cruelty began to escalate as the months wore on. It was never overt. Overt cruelty would have forced Leo to act. It was a campaign of quiet, psychological warfare. She started accidentally, leaving the sprinkler system on for hours, drowning my carefully tended seedlings. A bag of fertilizer I had bought would mysteriously go missing. Once, I came out to find my patch of lavender had been weed-whacked down to the ground. When I confronted her, my voice trembling with a hurt I couldn't hide, she would feign a perfect, wide-eyed innocence. "Oh my goodness, Eleanor, did the landscaper do that? I am so sorry. I'll have a word with him. He must have misunderstood." But she would never have a word with him. And we both knew it. My son, my gentle Leo, saw my distress. "Mom, don't get so worked up," he'd say, his voice pleading. "It's just a few plants. We can buy new ones." He didn't understand. It wasn't about the plants. It was about the malice. It was about her trying to destroy the only thing in that cold white house that brought me a spark of joy. The final, terrible breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was the anniversary of my Arthur's death, a day that was always heavy with a quiet grief for me. I had been feeling unwell all day, a touch of the flu perhaps, and I was resting in my room. That evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the modern, open-plan design of the house was not made for secrets. Sound traveled. "She's been in her room all day," Chloe said, her voice dripping with an exaggerated, weary sigh. "She's so fragile. Honestly, Leo, I don't know how much more of this I can take. It's like having a permanent, sad ghost haunting the house." "She's just having a bad day, Chloe," Leo said, his voice weak, defensive. "It's the anniversary of Dad's death." "I know," Chloe snapped, her voice losing its patient facade and turning sharp as broken glass. "And how many more anniversaries are we going to have to endure? How many more years of this? Of her puttering around in her messy garden, of her filling the house with the smell of old books and mothballs. When does it end? When do we get to have our house, our life, to ourselves?" Darn. There was a silence. A terrible, heavy silence. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, praying for my son to defend me. "What are you saying?" Leo finally whispered. And then came the wish. Chloe's voice dropped to a low, intense, and utterly sincere whisper, a whisper that was more venomous than any shout. "I'm saying I wish she would just go. I wish she would just have a nice, quiet, peaceful little heart attack in her sleep. God, can you imagine the relief? It would be so much better for everyone. For us. Even for her, really. She's not happy here. So why doesn't she just die?" And then the world stopped. My breath caught in my throat. My blood turned to ice in my veins. This wasn't a flash of anger. This wasn't a careless, cruel word. This was a sincere wish. A prayer for my death, offered up in my own son's kitchen. She wanted me gone. She wanted me dead, so she could have her perfect, minimalist life, free of the clutter of an old woman's existence. I waited to hear my son's outrage. I waited for him to yell, to tell her how monstrous she was. But all that came was a weak, broken sound. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice full of a pathetic, pleading anguish. "Don't say that." He didn't defend. He didn't condemn her. He just asked her not to say it. And in that moment, I knew I was truly, completely alone. My son would not protect me. My presence in his home was the price he was paying for his marriage. And it was a price his wife was no longer willing to pay. I lay in my bed, the sheets suddenly cold and damp against my skin. The initial shock, the feeling of being utterly annihilated by her hatred, began to slowly recede. And just as it had for Margaret, something else began to form in the void. Not anger. Not a desire for loud, messy revenge. Something much quieter. Something much deeper. I thought of my Arthur. I thought of his garden. I thought of what he always used to say. Some plants, like people, have secrets you can only learn by watching them closely. And I thought of one plant in particular. A rare, unassuming little vine he had kept in a special pot in his greenhouse. He called it the dreamer's ivy. He had told me stories about it. Stories he'd read in his ancient botany books. Stories from old, forgotten folklore. How its pollen, when inhaled in just the right tiny dose, could influence one's dreams, making them vivid, intense, and recursive. A harmless but powerful little plant. A plant that could make a person dream the same dream over and over again. Chloe had wished for my death. She had wished for me to die in my sleep. A cold, terrifying, and brilliant idea began to bloom in the darkness of my mind. She wanted me to die in her house. Fine. I would grant her wish. I would die for her. Again and again and again. Every single night. In her dreams. The war was not over. It had just entered a new, and much stranger, phase. I was no longer the victim. I was the gardener, and I was about to plant a seed in the fertile soil of her own guilty conscience. Chloe's wish for my death did not kill me. It did something far stranger. It woke me up. For months, I had been a ghost in their home, fading, quiet, and apologetic. But her words, that cruel, whispered prayer, acted like a splash of ice water to my soul. The shock and the hurt were immense, but beneath them, a part of me that had been dormant for years, the part of me that was Arthur's wife, a student of his quiet wisdom, began to stir. I did not have access to money. I did not have a phone to call a friend. I did not have the strength to fight them head on. But I had my mind, and I had my garden. The next day, I began my preparations. My movements were slow, deliberate, and invisible to them. They saw a frail old woman puttering in her little patch of dirt. They did not see a general planning a campaign. I started by tending to my dreamer's ivy. It was a small, unassuming vine I had planted in a hanging basket, tucked away in a corner where it wouldn't offend Chloe's aesthetic sensibilities. According to Arthur's books, the pollen was most potent when the plant was well cared for, when it felt happy. So I fed it. I watered it. I whispered to it. Just as Arthur had taught me, I was nurturing my weapon. The plan was simple. Its execution required the patience of a gardener. The folklore said the pollen was only effective when inhaled over time, in small, almost undetectable doses, just before sleep. It was not a poison. It was an influence. A suggestion, planted directly into the subconscious. My opportunity came in the laundry. It was one of the few household chores Chloe still allowed me to do. She was so particular about her expensive clothes, she didn't trust the housekeeper. And she was especially fussy about her pillows. She had a collection of silk pillowcases that had to be hand-washed and air-dried. Every 2 days, I would carefully wash her silk pillowcases, and I would hang them to dry on a little rack I kept right beside my herb garden, right beside the dreamer's ivy. As the afternoon sun warmed the leaves, an invisible, microscopic dusting of pollen would be released, settling on the damp silk. It was a dose so small, so infinitesimal, that it would be impossible to see or smell. It would be just part of the air, part of the clean, fresh scent of a pillowcase dried in the Vermont sunshine. For a week, nothing happened. I watched her. I waited. She continued her reign of quiet tyranny, oblivious. I continued to play the part of the beaten, fragile old woman. I ate the food she left for me. I spoke only when spoken to. I was a ghost, biding my time. And then, one morning, I noticed it. It was a small thing, a new shadow under her perfectly made-up eyes, a slight tremor in her hand as she poured her coffee. That afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends. Her voice was tight, strained. "I had the strangest dream last night," she said. "So vivid, I dreamed I dreamed Eleanor had a fall in the garden. It felt so real, I actually got up in the middle of the night to check on her. She laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. I must be more stressed than I thought. A small, cold smile touched my lips. The seeds were sprouting. I continued my routine. Washing the pillowcases, drying them in the sun, tending to my little vine. And I listened. The nightmares began to grow. At first, they were small anxieties. Dreams where I would have a coughing fit, and she couldn't find my water. Dreams where I would stumble, and she would try to catch me, but her arms would go right through me. They were her own subconscious guilt, her own fears about her wish, being watered and tended by my secret little plant. She became more and more agitated. She started drinking chamomile tea before bed, a suggestion I had helpfully offered. "It's so good for calming the nerves," I'd said, my eyes full of gentle sympathy. Of course, the chamomile came from my garden, too. It did nothing to stop the dreams. My son, my poor, blind Leo, was worried about her. "Chloe isn't sleeping well," he told me one day, his face etched with concern. "She keeps having these bad dreams about you. She's worried about your health." "Oh, the dear girl," I said, patting his hand. "She has such a good heart." The turning point in my campaign came a month after it began. I decided it was time to escalate. The dreams had, so far, been about accidents. Now, it was time for them to be about her wish. That day, when I watered the dreamer's ivy, I gave it a special feeding of potash, just as Arthur's book had recommended, to encourage a more potent blooms. That night, her screams woke the entire house. Leo came running out of their room. I heard him trying to comfort her, his voice frantic. "It was just a dream, honey, a nightmare. It wasn't real." "It was so real," she sobbed, her voice hysterical. "She was just lying there. She wasn't breathing. Oh, God, Leo, it was exactly what I was afraid of." She couldn't even say the word. Wished for. Her guilt was a roaring fire now, and I was feeding it with my invisible kindling. From that night on, the dream came back. Again, and again, and again. Every time she laid her head on her soft, silk pillowcase, she was forced to witness a quiet, peaceful, perfect enactment of her own ugly wish. She would wake up screaming, night after night. Her perfect, minimalist house had become her own private torture chamber. Her beautiful king-sized bed was now a place of terror. She stopped sleeping. Her beauty began to wither. Her sharp, confident edges grew ragged. She was a ghost in her own home, haunted by a specter of her own making. She started seeing a therapist who told her she was suffering from an anxiety disorder, brought on by the stress of being a caregiver. The irony was exquisite. The fight was almost over. I knew it. She was breaking. All I had to do was wait for the surrender. And I didn't have to wait long. The final week was a slow, agonizing descent into madness for her. For me, it was a quiet, patient wait. The nightly terrors had taken their toll. She had become a bundle of raw nerves, a shadow of the sharp, confident woman who had moved me into her home. She stopped sleeping in her bedroom altogether, choosing instead to doze fitfully on the sofa in the living room, as if proximity to the attic was too much to bear. It didn't matter. The dreams followed her. The end came on a Saturday morning. It was a beautiful sunny day, but the atmosphere inside the house was as heavy as a thundercloud. I came downstairs to find her in the kitchen. She was standing perfectly still, staring at a glass of water on the counter, her knuckles white. She hadn't heard me enter. Leo walked in behind me. "Chloe, honey," he said softly. "Are you okay?" She turned around, and her eyes were not just fearful. They were empty. Utterly, terrifyingly empty. "She's going to die today," she said, her voice a flat, dead monotone. "What are you talking about?" Leo asked, rushing to her side. "Who's going to die?" Chloe whispered, her eyes flicking towards the ceiling, towards my room. "Eleanor. I saw it again last night. It was different this time. It was so clear. Today is the day." She's going to die today, in her sleep. Darcy, Chloe, stop it, Leo said, his voice pleading. You're not making any sense. It's the dreams. It's the stress. Mom is fine. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. I know it's going to happen. And I can't. I can't be here when it does. I can't. And that was it. That was her surrender. She walked past both of us, a zombie in expensive loungewear, and went upstairs. An hour later, she came down with 2 suitcases. Her face was a blank mask. She didn't look at me. She didn't even look at Leo. I'm going to my mother's, she announced to the empty air. I'll send for the rest of my things later. She picked up her car keys from the counter, and without another word, she walked out the front door and out of our lives. We heard her car start, the tires screeching as she pulled out of the driveway too fast. And then, silence. A profound, echoing silence in the cold, white house. Leo stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the empty space where his wife had just been. He looked broken, lost. He slowly turned to look at me, and his eyes were filled with a million questions, but he seemed too afraid to ask a single one. I'll go make us some tea, I said softly, breaking the silence. Chloe never came back. She and Leo divorced. He sold that cold, white house, which had been her monument to a life that never truly existed. He took a small apartment in the city, closer to his work at the university. He needed to heal. He needed to find his own spine again, the one he had misplaced somewhere during his marriage. He comes to visit me every weekend now. We work in the garden together, just like he used to do with his father. We don't talk about Chloe. We don't talk about the dreams. We don't talk about the months I spent in his house. There is a quiet understanding between us, a shared, unspoken knowledge. He knows that a great and strange battle was fought and won under his roof, and that his mother is not as fragile as he once believed. And I know that he is, finally, learning to stand up for himself. We are rebuilding. I never told him my secret. I never told him about the dreamer's ivy, about the pollen on the pillowcases. It is a secret I will take to my grave. It was a weapon I used in a silent war, and like all weapons, it is a dangerous and terrible thing. What I did was not kind. It was not gentle. But I believe, with all my heart, that it was a necessary form of justice. Chloe wished for my death. She wanted to erase me, to turn me into a sad, forgotten ghost. I did not grant her wish for my death. Instead, I granted her wish to be haunted. I simply gave her the ghost she had been trying to create, but I made it her own conscience. I let her own cruelty, her own dark wish, become her tormentor. She was not driven mad by a ghost. She was driven mad by the reflection of her own soul. I learned that the quietest people often have the deepest knowledge. I learned that a garden teaches you not just about patience, but about power, about the hidden properties of things. And I learned that when someone pushes you into the darkness and tries to silence you, sometimes the only way to fight back is to use the darkness and the silence to your advantage. You become the thing they fear the most. So if you are out there and you feel that your life is being harassed, that you are being made small and insignificant, please listen to this old woman. Look for the secret knowledge you possess, the things only you know. Your strength may not be in a loud voice or in a physical fight. It might be in your patience. It might be in your wisdom. It might be in the quiet, steady tending of a garden. Find that strength and use it. Thank you for listening to my strange story. Some truths are quieter than others, but they all deserve to be told. If my story has resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell. It helps these stories find their way to those who need them. And if you have a story about a time you found an unexpected way to reclaim your power, please share it with our community in the comments. We are all stronger when we listen to one another. Love you all. This is Grandma Eleanor, and I'll see you in the next story.